Imagine getting raided by the FBI, not for something you did, but for a relationship you didn't even know was fake. That's exactly what happened to Chris Andersen, better known to NBA fans as Birdman, a man with a larger-than-life personality, an even louder appearance, and a playing style that was pure chaos in motion. Tattoos from head to toe, explosive dunks, and a mohawk that made him impossible to miss. But in 2012, while flying high with the Denver Nuggets and on the verge of joining LeBron's Heatles, his world came crashing down. It started with a teenage girl, turned into a web of lies, and ended with an international manhunt involving stolen identities, secret conversations, and a woman in Canada who had never left her house. This wasn't just a scandal, it was one of the wildest catfishing schemes in sports history, and it nearly destroyed an NBA career. But how did it all begin, and who was actually pulling the strings behind the scenes? Let's rewind. To understand how Chris Andersen got tangled in one of the NBA's strangest scandals, you first need to understand who Birdman really was. He wasn't a superstar. He didn't put up jaw-dropping numbers, but somehow he was unforgettable, standing 6'10" with a mohawk, full-body tattoos, and a constant look like he just burst out of a comic book. Andersen had the kind of presence that made you stop whatever you were doing the moment he stepped on the court. Andersen's path to the NBA wasn't smooth either. He didn't come from a blue blood college or go high in the draft. In fact, he wasn't drafted at all. After playing one season of junior college ball and bouncing around international leagues, he clawed his way into the league through sheer energy and willpower. He wasn't flashy with the ball, but he flew around the rim like a man possessed. His nickname, Birdman, wasn't just a nickname, it was a way of life. What set him apart wasn't just his look, it was the way he played. Every possession was a war. Loose balls, offensive boards, help side blocks. Birdman was everywhere. He brought chaos in the best way. And when the Nuggets were running and gunning with Carmelo Anthony, Allen Iverson, and J.R. Smith, Birdman was their anchor of madness, the guy who would throw himself into the fire and get the crowd on its feet. But it wasn't all high-flying dunks and hype videos. Behind the scenes, Andersen battled demons that nearly ended his career. In 2006, he was suspended from the NBA for violating the league's substance abuse policy, one of the longest suspensions in league history at the time. It wasn't marijuana or performance-enhancing drugs. The league never confirmed what it was, only that it was a drug of abuse. Most assumed his story was over right then and there. But instead of fading away, Andersen spent 2 years rebuilding himself, mentally, physically, and spiritually. And when he was finally reinstated in 2008, he didn't just return to the NBA. He came back with a vengeance. Denver gave him a second shot, and he didn't waste it. He became one of the most impactful role players in the league, a defensive enforcer, a bench mob leader, a walking momentum shift. By 2012, Birdman had overcome addiction, doubt, and irrelevance. He was a comeback story in human form, beloved by fans, respected by teammates, and finally on the verge of something bigger. But just as his career was about to hit a new peak, something sinister was brewing. A seemingly innocent relationship, a teenage girl, and a web of lies so twisted, even the FBI would have a hard time figuring it out. At first, it seemed like just another celebrity fan connection. A few messages, a few compliments. Nothing unusual for someone like Chris Andersen, a recognizable NBA figure with fans all over the country. But this one felt different. In 2011, Andersen began exchanging messages with a girl named Paris Dunn. She was young, pretty, and seemed fascinated by Birdman's wild persona. According to the messages, she was 21 years old and lived in California. The two connected through Facebook and quickly moved the conversation to more private platforms, emails, phone calls, even texts. The conversations grew flirtatious, then personal. Over time, it started to feel like more than just an online fling. What Andersen didn't know was that Paris wasn't who she claimed to be. She was actually 17 at the time, and worse, the person he was messaging wasn't even her. Not really, because behind the scenes, someone else had access to both their accounts. Someone who knew what to say, how to manipulate, and how to stay invisible just long enough to keep the illusion alive. Still, Andersen had no reason to suspect anything. She sent him photos, they talked on the phone. She even flew out to Denver, stayed at his house, and according to reports, the two were intimate. For Birdman, it was just another NBA connection, the kind of thing that happens when you're rich, famous, and single. But just a few months later, everything would unravel, because that relationship, the one he thought was private and consensual, was actually part of something far darker. And when the truth started to surface, it wouldn't be Andersen that called it off. It would be the FBI. May 2012. Chris Andersen was getting ready for practice when there was a knock on the door. But it wasn't a fan or a reporter or even a teammate. It was law enforcement, uniformed officers, search warrants, federal agents. They came in, seized his computers, electronics, even his phones. And just like that, Birdman went from cult hero to prime suspect without any warning. The media pounced. Headlines exploded with vague accusations. Local outlets in Denver began reporting that Andersen was under investigation for an inappropriate relationship with a minor. Rumors spiraled out of control. Was it trafficking, assault, a hidden double life? The truth? No one actually knew. Not even the police at that point. But none of that mattered to the public. To them, the damage was already done. Sponsors distanced themselves. The Nuggets placed him on leave, and on every sports show, Birdman's name was suddenly being whispered next to the ugliest kinds of allegations, all based on something that wasn't even real. Andersen kept quiet. He didn't defend himself publicly. He didn't explain. His lawyers issued a statement claiming his innocence, but that only fueled more speculation. What no one knew, not the fans, not the press, not even the investigators at first, was that Andersen and the teenage girl had both been played. There was someone else else involved. Someone who had been behind the keyboard the entire time, impersonating both sides of the conversation, crafting drama, stirring conflict, and pushing this story toward a complete disaster. But who would go to those lengths, and why? The answer wasn't in Denver, or even in California. It was hiding in one of the most unlikely places imaginable, a tiny, isolated home in rural Canada. As the investigation dragged on, something wasn't adding up. Andersen claimed the relationship was consensual and that he genuinely believed the girl was of legal age. Paris, the girl at the center of the scandal, insisted that Birdman had initiated everything. But when authorities dug into the digital evidence, the emails, the messages, the call logs, they started seeing something strange. Some of the messages Paris claimed to have sent weren't sent from her IP address. Some of the emails Andersen thought he had written responses to weren't even from Paris's actual account. It was like someone had created an invisible middleman, impersonating both of them, fabricating messages, manipulating tone, and even starting fights between them by twisting their words. It was more than just catfishing. This was full-blown identity theft, weaponized. Then came the shocker. Neither Andersen nor Paris had ever been talking directly to each other. They'd both been communicating with the same third party, a puppeteer who had access to their private accounts, who played them against each other, and who had been controlling the entire relationship from behind the scenes. For over a year, the FBI traced the activity across borders. Dozens of fake emails, burner accounts, masked IP addresses, and eventually, the trail led them to a remote home in Manitoba, Canada. There, in near total isolation, lived a woman named Shelley Chartier. No job, no friends, no social life. Just a keyboard, an internet connection, and a disturbing ability to become anyone she wanted. Shelley had posed as Paris, she'd posed as Birdman, and in doing so, she orchestrated a fake relationship so convincing that it almost ruined two lives. But the question still remained, who was Shelley Chartier, and what exactly did she want? The answer would be even more bizarre than anyone expected. Before we get to the twist that left even the FBI stunned, if you've made it this far, you're clearly locked into this wild story, so hit that like button to show some love. And if stories like this, the ones hiding just beneath the surface of the sports world, are your thing, go ahead and subscribe. We've got even crazier NBA stories coming, and trust me, you won't want to miss what's next. Now back to the woman who fooled the world from a room no one ever entered. Shelley Chartier didn't look like someone capable of engineering one of the wildest catfishing schemes in sports history. She wasn't some criminal mastermind or slick hacker living in luxury. She lived in squalor, in a tiny house in a remote Canadian town called Easterville, population under 1,000. She had dropped out of school in the 6th grade, barely left her house in over a decade, no driver's license, no social media of her own. Her teeth were rotting, her social skills non-existent. She lived with her mother, surviving on government assistance. No one, not her neighbors, not even people in her town, knew what she was doing behind closed doors. But when she was alone, with nothing but a computer and internet access, Shelley became someone else. Dozens of someone else's, actually. She created fake Facebook profiles of celebrities, athletes, models, and fans. She knew how to mimic tone, use real photos, and build entire digital personalities from scratch. To Andersen and Paris, she seemed like a trusted third party, someone relaying messages between two people who couldn't connect directly. In reality, she was controlling both sides of the conversation, setting up fake arguments, sending fake photos, making fake promises. Then, when things got too real, she twisted it all into chaos, sparking jealousy, confusion, and emotional fallout that she could sit back and watch unfold. And this wasn't a one-time thing. Shelley had catfished other victims before, other athletes, other public figures. In some cases, she pretended to be romantically involved with multiple celebrities and pitted them against each other just to see what would happen. And here's the most chilling part. She didn't do it for money. She didn't blackmail anyone. She didn't extort. This wasn't about cash. It was about control. From the shadows of her isolated room, Shelley had found a way to manipulate people with fame, money, and power. And none of them even realized they weren't talking to who they thought they were. But the question everyone still wanted to know was, why? What drove someone with no criminal record, no clear motive, and no obvious gain to create this level of destruction? The answer was disturbing, but it was also tragically human. When authorities finally questioned Shelley Chartier, they weren't dealing with some cold, calculated criminal mastermind. They were dealing with someone who had barely lived outside her own mind. She confessed almost immediately. No theatrics, no cover-up, just a quiet explanation that left everyone unsettled. "I just wanted to talk to people," she said. That was it. No ransom, no revenge plot, just pure isolation and a dangerous desire to connect, even if it meant pretending to be someone else entirely. For over a decade, Shelley had lived in silence. No friends, no job, no real contact with the outside world. The internet became her only outlet, and eventually, her playground. But instead of using it to observe, she used it to control. She didn't just want to feel connection, she wanted power, influence, relevance, and by impersonating athletes, models, and celebrities, she created her own little world, one where she called the shots. She could decide who dated who fought, who fell apart. She could sit back and watch real people crumble over fake emotions she had orchestrated. And the scary part, she was really good at it. Experts later said her ability to manipulate digital conversations, to mimic tone, personality, even language patterns, was on par with trained social engineers. But unlike a con artist, she wasn't doing it for a payoff. She just didn't know how to live without it. It was a mix of mental illness, extreme isolation, and emotional starvation. A dangerous cocktail that turned a lonely woman into a social saboteur. And while the story was disturbing, the legal system wasn't quite sure what to do with her, because when it came time for sentencing, what happened next shocked everyone. By the time the truth came out, the damage had already been done. Chris Andersen, who had once been one of the most beloved role players in the NBA, was now stuck with a cloud of suspicion that wouldn't go away. Even though the charges were dropped, even though he was cleared of wrongdoing, even though the FBI confirmed he was a victim, not a predator, the media had already made up its mind. And in the court of public opinion, allegations often stick longer than the facts. Sponsors didn't come back. His reputation took a hit, and despite being exonerated, the stigma followed him. He stayed quiet about the whole ordeal, never going on a redemption tour, never releasing a tell-all. He just kept his head down and focused on basketball. In 2013, he signed with the Miami Heat, joining forces with LeBron, D-Wade, and Chris Bosh during their championship run. And while the big names got the spotlight, Birdman became the energy off the bench, a spark plug who helped them win it all that year. A silent redemption, built not with words, but with wins. Paris Dunn, the teenager at the center of it all, would later go on to appear on reality TV and give her own interviews, positioning herself as a victim of both Shelley and Andersen. But the story wasn't that simple, and neither was the public reaction. Some people blamed her, others defended her. But just like Birdman, her name was now tied to a scandal she hadn't fully controlled. And Shelley Chartier, after pleading guilty to multiple counts of fraud and impersonation, she was sentenced to just 18 months in jail. 18 months. For years of manipulation, identity theft, and lives nearly ruined. And once she served her time, she quietly returned to the same tiny home in Easterville, where she still lives. Mostly off the grid, rarely seen in public, and completely removed from the chaos she caused. For a story that began with digital deception, it ended with something almost more haunting. Silence. No closure. No apology. No final act of justice. Just broken reputations, scarred memories, and a reminder that not every villain looks like one, and not every victim gets to feel like they've been cleared. But this still wasn't the final twist, because what Shelley had pulled off, it wasn't just a catfish story, it was a warning. The craziest part about the Birdman catfishing scandal, most people still don't know it ever happened. It wasn't blasted on every network. It didn't dominate ESPN the way other scandals do. Maybe it was too strange, too complicated, or maybe it just didn't fit the typical narrative. But behind the scenes, this story was huge, not just because of the headlines it could have created, but because of the very real damage it almost did. A professional athlete, a teenage girl, a lonely woman behind a keyboard. 3 completely different lives, all tangled up in a fake relationship that none of them ever truly controlled. Chris Andersen didn't lose his job. He didn't go to jail, but he lost something else. Trust, peace of mind, and a part of his legacy that can never be separated from what happened. Paris Dunn didn't ask to be manipulated either, but her part in the story remains complicated, and her name will always be linked to the lie. And Shelley Chartier, she returned to a life of isolation, but now, with the world knowing exactly what she was capable of. This wasn't just an internet prank. It was a story about loneliness, control, fame, and how the internet can blur those lines in ways we're still trying to understand. In a world where everyone lives online, where a DM can lead to a headline and a fake profile can destroy a real life, this was the Mandy Te'o story before Mandy Te'o, a cautionary tale that flew under the radar, but nearly took down a man who had already survived so much. And maybe that's the real story here. Birdman was always known for flying high, but the moment he was about to crash, it wasn't his strength or his skills that saved him. It was the truth, hidden, slow to arrive, but powerful enough to set him free. This story flew under the radar, but if you're still here, you get it. You know the NBA is more than stats and highlights. It's full of moments like this, dark, bizarre, and completely unforgettable. So if you want more deep dives into the stories no one else is telling, tap that subscribe button, hit the bell so you're first in line when the next wild NBA story drops. And if this one blew your mind, drop a comment below. We read every one, and we've got some even crazier ones coming soon. Stay locked in,